The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched beyond what most eyes could see. Thousands of delegates from across the known galaxy sat in their assigned sections, each group representing their species with pride. The annual meeting had many purposes, but today's session was special. Today was the day of the theological census. Ambassador Chen sat quietly in the human section, her hands folded in her lap. She watched as species after species presented their gods of war to the assembly. This tradition had gone on for over 2,000 years, ever since the council was formed. Every civilization was expected to share information about their war deities. It helped other species understand their military customs and religious boundaries. The Kethran delegate stood first. He was a tall, lizard-like being with scales that gleamed under the hall's bright lights. His voice echoed through the chamber as he spoke about Bloodfang the Eternal. The Kethran war god was described as a massive creature with teeth like swords and claws that could tear through metal. Bloodfang demanded blood sacrifices before every battle and promised victory to those who fought without mercy. Next came the Zephyrians. Their ambassador was a bird-like creature with feathers that changed color as she spoke. She told the assembly about the Stormbringer, their god of war who rode lightning bolts across battlefields. The Stormbringer taught the Zephyrians to strike fast and hard, like thunder following lightning. Their war god demanded that battles be finished quickly, believing that long wars were wasteful. The Mollusk Collective sent their representative next. The slug-like being moved slowly to the speaking platform, leaving a trail of glowing slime. Their war god was called the Deep Crusher, a massive creature that lived in the darkest parts of their ocean world. The Deep Crusher taught patience in war, telling his followers to wait in the shadows before striking. Their battles could last for years, with both sides waiting for the perfect moment to attack. One by one, more species shared their stories. The rock people of Granite Prime spoke of Boulder Breaker, their god who taught them to build walls that could never fall. The gas beings from the nebula worlds described Wind Ripper, their deity who moved like a hurricane and destroyed everything in his path. The insect-like hive worlds presented Queenslayer, their war goddess who taught them to fight as one mind with a million bodies. Each story was different, but they all had the same basic elements. Every species had a war god or goddess. Every deity taught their followers how to fight and when to fight. Some were cruel and demanded endless battle. Others were more careful and taught strategy over strength. But they all existed, and they all guided their species in times of war. The pattern continued for hours. Hundreds of species shared their war deities with the assembly. Some gods were ancient, older than recorded history. Others were newer, born from recent conflicts or discovered through space exploration. But every single species had one. Finally, the council secretary called for the human representative. Ambassador Chen stood slowly and walked to the speaking platform. The hall grew quiet as thousands of alien eyes focused on her. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes. She had been Earth's representative to the council for 15 years, but she had never enjoyed this particular ceremony. Ambassador Chen, the secretary said in the universal translation language, please present humanity's war deity to the assembly. Chen looked out at the sea of faces staring at her. She took a deep breath and spoke clearly into the microphone. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, humanity appreciates the opportunity to participate in this census. However, I must inform you that we do not currently have a war deity. The silence that followed was complete. Not a single sound could be heard in the massive hall. Thousands of beings sat frozen, unsure if they had heard correctly. The translation system checked itself twice, confirming that the words had been transmitted accurately. Finally, the Kethran delegate stood up. I'm sorry, Ambassador Chen, but there must be some error in translation. Did you say that humans don't have a war god? That is correct, Chen replied calmly. We do not have a war deity at this time. A wave of confused murmurs swept through the assembly. The secretary looked puzzled and checked his notes several times. This had never happened before. Every species in the galaxy had a war deity. It was considered one of the basic requirements for advanced civilization. The Zephyrian ambassador's feathers turned bright red, which indicated extreme confusion in her species. She stood and addressed Chen directly. Ambassador, surely you mean that your war god is sleeping or hidden? Perhaps humans worship their war deity in secret? Chen shook her head. No, Ambassador. We simply do not have one anymore. The word anymore caused an even bigger reaction. Beings throughout the hall stood up, talking loudly to each other in dozens of different languages. The secretary had to activate the order-keeping system, which sent out calming sound waves to quiet the crowd. The representative from the Mollusk Collective slowly made his way to a speaking position. "Ambassador Chen," he said in his slow, deliberate way, "are you telling this assembly that humanity once had a war deity, but no longer does?" "That is correct," Chen answered. "What happened to your war god?" asked the granite being from the rock worlds. "Did he die in battle? Was he destroyed by enemies?" Chen paused for a long moment. She knew that her next words would shock the assembly even more than her previous statements. "Our war deity was retired from service." The hall erupted in chaos. The concept of retiring a god was impossible for most species to understand. Gods were eternal beings. They didn't retire like old soldiers or worn-out machinery. They ruled forever or died in cosmic battles. The idea that a species would simply dismiss their war deity was beyond comprehension. The secretary spent several minutes restoring order to the assembly. When the hall was finally quiet again, he addressed Chen with obvious confusion. "Ambassador, the concept of retiring a deity is unusual. Could you explain how such a thing is possible?" Chen looked around the hall at all the confused faces staring at her. She had known this moment would come eventually. Earth had been a member of the Galactic Council for 30 years, but they had always managed to avoid the theological census before. There had always been some crisis or emergency that postponed the ceremony. But now there was no escape. She would have to tell the truth. "Honored delegates," she began, "humanity's relationship with our war deity was complicated. The process of retirement was not simple, and the story is quite long. If the council wishes to hear the full account, I am prepared to share it." The secretary looked around the hall. Every single delegate was leaning forward, eager to hear more. This was the most interesting theological census in decades. "The council would very much like to hear your full account, Ambassador Chen. Please tell us the story of humanity's war deity." Chen nodded and took another deep breath. She was about to tell a story that no human had ever shared with alien species before. It was a story that revealed something fundamental about human nature, something that might change how the galaxy viewed her species forever. "Very well," she said. "But I must warn you all that this story may be disturbing to some species. The tale of humanity's war deity is not like the stories you have heard today. It does not end with glory or eternal rule. It ends with a choice that no other species in this galaxy has ever made." The hall was completely silent as every being waited to hear what humans had done to their god of war. Ambassador Chen stepped closer to the microphone and began her tale. The massive hall remained silent as thousands of alien beings listened to every word. "To understand what happened to our war deity," Chen said, "you must first understand what he was like. His name was Ares Manas, though different human cultures called him by different names throughout history. He was not like the war gods you have described today." She paused, organizing her thoughts. This story went back thousands of years, and she needed to tell it properly. 12,000 years ago, when humans were still living in small tribes and fighting with stone weapons, Ares Manas first appeared to our people. He was magnificent to look at, tall and strong with armor that gleamed like the sun. But what made him different from other war gods was his message. Chen activated a small holographic projector that showed images of ancient human cave paintings. The drawings showed a tall figure standing between two groups of smaller figures, his hands raised as if stopping a fight. "Ares Manas did not teach humans to love war," Chen continued. "Instead, he taught us rules for war. He said that fighting was sometimes necessary, but it should never be done for pleasure or sport. He created what we called the Ancient Compact, a set of laws that would guide human warfare forever." The hologram changed to show more cave paintings. These depicted warriors helping fallen enemies and protecting small figures that clearly represented children and non-combatants. The first rule of the Ancient Compact was simple: protect those who cannot protect themselves. Warriors were commanded to shield children, elderly people, and anyone who was not fighting. The second rule was equally important: spare those who surrender. A defeated enemy who gave up their weapons was to be treated with respect and allowed to live. Murmurs went through the assembly. Several species found these concepts strange. The Kethran delegate looked particularly confused, since their war god demanded the death of all enemies. The third rule, Chen went on, was perhaps the most important. Fight only when you must. Arismanes taught that war should be the last choice, not the first. Humans were supposed to try talking, trading, or other peaceful solutions before picking up weapons. The hologram showed images of early human settlements, with figures meeting peacefully between different tribes. Then it showed the same figures fighting, but in organized formations rather than wild mobs. For thousands of years, these rules worked well. Human tribes followed the ancient compact in their battles. They developed honor codes and warrior traditions based on Arismanes' teachings. Wars were fought with purpose and restraint. Victory was important, but so was how that victory was achieved. Chen moved to a different section of her presentation. The hologram now showed images of larger human settlements and more advanced weapons. As humans grew more numerous and spread across our world, our wars became bigger and more complex. But Arismanes was always there, guiding and teaching. He would appear on battlefields to remind warriors of their duties. He would visit leaders in their dreams to counsel restraint. He took pride in humanity's growing civilization. The images showed humans building cities and developing new technologies, but they also showed larger armies and more sophisticated weapons. Arismanes believed that as humans became more advanced, they would become more civilized. He thought that better education and technology would make wars smaller and less frequent. He was proud when human philosophers began writing about just war and moral combat. He encouraged the development of military codes and rules of engagement. Chen's voice became slightly sad as she continued the story. But our war deity began to notice troubling changes in human behavior. As our weapons became more powerful, some humans started finding ways around the ancient compact. They would follow the letter of the rules while ignoring their spirit. They would protect non-combatants from their own side while allowing harm to come to enemies' families. They would accept surrenders formally, but treat prisoners badly afterward. The hologram showed images of larger battles with more casualties. The fighting looked more organized but also more brutal. Arismanes tried to adapt his teachings to address these problems. He appeared to human leaders more frequently, reminding them of their duties. He inspired the creation of new warrior codes and military traditions. He encouraged the development of laws that would govern warfare between nations. Chen activated a new set of images showing ancient human civilizations, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. For several thousand more years, this approach seemed to work. Great human civilizations rose and created elaborate systems for managing war. They built armies with strict discipline and clear rules. They developed concepts like diplomacy and strategic alliances. They created military academies to train officers in both tactics and ethics. The images showed impressive ancient armies and fortifications, but also scenes of negotiation and treaty signing. Arismanes was pleased with these developments. He believed that humans were finally learning to wage war properly, with purpose, restraint, and honor. He thought that the ancient compact was becoming stronger, not weaker, as human civilization advanced. Chen's expression grew darker as she moved to the next part of the story. But our war deity was beginning to misunderstand something fundamental about human nature. He thought that our growing sophistication in warfare meant we were becoming more civilized. In reality, we were becoming more efficient at killing while finding new ways to justify breaking his rules. The hologram showed images of medieval battles and siege warfare. The scenes were more detailed and graphic than the earlier images. During what humans call the medieval period, armies began targeting civilian populations more systematically. They would siege cities and starve entire populations to force surrender. They would destroy farmland and poison wells to weaken their enemies. They justified these actions by claiming they were necessary for victory. More disturbing images appeared, showing the aftermath of medieval battles and sieges. Arismanes was deeply troubled by these developments. He had taught humans to protect non-combatants, but they were finding ways to argue that everyone in an enemy territory was a legitimate target. He had taught them to fight with honor, but they were developing tactics that prioritized effectiveness over ethics. Chen paused and looked around the hall. Many of the alien delegates were following the story with great interest. Some looked confused by the concepts she was describing, while others seemed to understand the problem that was developing. Our war deity tried to intervene more directly. He began appearing on battlefields not just to inspire, but to actively stop violations of the ancient compact. He would shield innocent people from harm and force warriors to spare defeated enemies. But this created a new problem. The hologram showed images of humans looking up at a glowing figure in the sky, but their expressions were not of worship. They looked annoyed and frustrated. Human military leaders began to see Ares Manas as an obstacle to victory rather than a guide to proper warfare. They started planning battles to avoid his intervention. They developed tactics specifically designed to work around his presence. Some even began to see him as a weakness that their enemies might exploit. Chen's voice became even more serious as she reached a crucial point in the story. This was when Ares Manas made his first major mistake. Instead of recognizing that humans were outgrowing his guidance, he assumed that he simply needed to teach them better. He decided to become more involved in human affairs, to guide them more closely toward true civilization. The final images in this section showed the war deity appearing more frequently in human history, but always seeming to arrive after the fighting had already begun. What our war god didn't understand, Chen concluded, was that humans were not becoming less civilized. We were becoming more civilized in ways that made us far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. We were learning to wage war with the efficiency of machines and the creativity of artists. And we were rapidly approaching a point where even a god of war would not be able to keep up with human innovation and violence. The hall remained silent as Chen finished this part of her story. The alien delegates were beginning to understand that this tale was heading toward something unprecedented in galactic history. Chen continued her story, and the holographic display changed to show images of larger human armies and more advanced weapons. The scenes were from what humans called the medieval period, but they looked far more organized and brutal than the earlier tribal conflicts. As human civilization entered what we call the Middle Ages, Chen said, Ares Manas faced challenges he had never imagined. Human wars were growing larger and more complex. Armies numbered in the tens of thousands instead of hundreds. The weapons were becoming more deadly, and the tactics more sophisticated. The hologram showed massive siege engines attacking walled cities. Soldiers in metal armor fought with steel weapons while catapults hurled stones and fire over fortress walls. The first major shock to our war deity came during what humans called the Crusades. These were religious wars that lasted for centuries. Armies from different parts of our world traveled vast distances to fight over control of sacred places. Images appeared showing columns of armored warriors marching across continents. The scenes were impressive but also deeply troubling. Ares Manas watched in growing horror as humans committed acts that completely violated the ancient compact. Warriors who claimed to fight for holy causes massacred entire cities. They killed non-combatants by the thousands, including children and elderly people. They justified these actions by claiming their enemies were not truly human. Chen's voice became heavier as she described these events. Our war deity tried to intervene. He appeared on battlefields and tried to stop the worst atrocities. He inspired individual warriors to show mercy and protect innocents. But for every person he saved, hundreds more died in ways that violated everything he had taught humanity. The hologram showed the aftermath of medieval battles, burning cities and fields of dead, but it also showed a tall, glowing figure moving among the carnage, trying to help the wounded and protect survivors. The problem was that humans had learned to plan around divine intervention. Military leaders knew that Ares Manas would try to protect non-combatants, so they made sure their worst actions happened when he was busy elsewhere. They spread their armies across vast areas, making it impossible for even a god to be everywhere at once. New images showed maps with army movements across continents. The scale of human warfare had grown beyond anything that could be managed by a single divine being. Then came the Mongol invasions. Chen continued. Armies swept across the largest continent on our world like nothing humanity had ever seen. They conquered territory faster than news could travel. They destroyed entire civilizations and built pyramids from the skulls of their enemies. The hologram displayed the shocking scope of these conquests. Vast territories changing hands in a matter of years. Cities disappearing from maps entirely. Ares Manas was completely overwhelmed. He tried to limit the destruction, but the Mongol war machine was too large and moved too quickly. By the time he could respond to one atrocity, 10 more had been committed hundreds of miles away. He began to realize that human warfare had grown beyond his ability to control. Chen paused and looked around the assembly. Many of the alien delegates were showing signs of distress. The concept of warfare, outgrowing divine control, was disturbing to species whose war gods maintained strict oversight of their conflicts. But the real crisis for our war deity came with the development of gunpowder weapons, Chen said. The hologram showed early cannons and primitive firearms. Suddenly, humans could kill each other from much greater distances. A single weapon could destroy fortress walls that had taken years to build. Individual warriors could kill multiple enemies without ever engaging in personal combat. The entire nature of warfare was changing. Images of Renaissance-era battles appeared, showing armies with cannons and early muskets. The scenes looked more like organized slaughter than the honor-bound combat of earlier periods. Ares Menaz tried to adapt his teachings to these new realities. He encouraged the development of military codes that would govern the use of these powerful weapons. He inspired human leaders to create laws limiting the targets that could be attacked with cannons and firearms. The display showed documents and treaties, with text in various human languages discussing rules of war. For a while, this seemed to work. Human nations created elaborate protocols for declaring war and conducting battles. They developed concepts like military targets versus civilian areas. They established rules for treating prisoners and protecting non-combatants. But Chen's expression remained grim as she continued. However, humans were also becoming more creative in finding ways around these restrictions. They developed the concept of total war, the idea that everything in an enemy territory was a legitimate target because it might support the war effort. They began targeting farms, factories, and transportation systems, claiming these were military necessities. The hologram showed the destruction of non-military targets, burned fields, destroyed workshops, and broken bridges. During what we call the Napoleonic Wars, entire nations mobilized for conflict. Armies numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Battles could kill more people in a single day than had died in entire medieval wars. The scale of destruction was beyond anything our war deity had anticipated. Massive battlefield scenes appeared, showing the aftermath of battles with casualties numbering in the tens of thousands. Ares Menaz was becoming desperate. He tried to appear to military leaders and convince them to return to more limited forms of warfare. He inspired peace movements and diplomatic efforts. He even attempted to influence the development of international law. The hologram showed scenes of negotiations and peace conferences, with the faint outline of a divine figure observing from the background. But humans had developed something that our war deity couldn't counter: industrial production. We could now manufacture weapons faster than they could be destroyed. We could train soldiers faster than they could be killed. We could replace everything we lost in battle and come back stronger than before. Images of early factories appeared, showing mass production of weapons and military equipment. The Industrial Revolution changed everything, Chen said. Humans could now wage war on a scale that was truly global. We built weapons that could kill hundreds of people at once. We created systems of production that could support armies of millions. We developed strategies that treated entire populations as military resources. The hologram showed steam-powered ships, early machine guns, and massive artillery pieces. Our war deity watched in growing alarm as humans prepared for conflicts that would involve every person on the planet. We were no longer just fighting with our armies. We were fighting with our entire civilizations. Every farmer, factory worker, and merchant became part of the war effort. Chen's voice became deeply serious as she reached a crucial point in the story. By the end of the 19th century, Ares Menaz realized that something fundamental had changed. Humans were no longer just using better weapons to fight the same kinds of wars. We had completely reimagined what war could be. We had industrialized violence and turned killing into a science. The final images in this section showed early photographs of industrial-age battlefields and military installations. Our war deity had spent thousands of years trying to teach humans restraint and honor in combat. But we had learned those lessons too well. We had become so efficient at following his rules that we could violate their spirit while maintaining their form. We could conduct honorable wars that killed more people than the most barbaric conflicts of ancient times. Chen looked around the hall at the sea of confused and disturbed alien faces. Ares Menaz began to understand that he was not guiding human warfare anymore. Instead, human warfare was evolving beyond his comprehension. We were approaching conflicts that would make even a god of war question whether such things should be allowed to exist. The ambassador paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembly. But the worst was yet to come. The 20th century would bring innovations in warfare that would finally break our war deity's faith in humanity completely. What we accomplished in the next 100 years would convince Ares Manas that humans had become something he never intended to create. The holographic display shifted to show images from the early 20th century. Ambassador Chen's expression grew even more serious as she prepared to describe the events that would finally break the relationship between humanity and their war deity. The year 1914 marked the beginning of what humans call the First World War, Chen said. It was unlike anything that had ever happened in our history. For the first time, an entire planet was at war with itself. The hologram showed maps of human territories with vast areas marked in different colors to represent the opposing sides. Lines of conflict stretched across continents and oceans. Ares Manas watched in shock as humans mobilized over 70 million soldiers. We had created weapons that could kill thousands of people in minutes. We dug trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles and filled them with poison gas and automatic weapons. Images appeared showing the industrial scale of World War I, massive artillery barrages, endless lines of trenches and soldiers wearing masks to protect against chemical weapons. Our war deity tried desperately to limit the destruction. He appeared on battlefields and tried to inspire mercy among the soldiers. He influenced military leaders to avoid the worst atrocities, but the scale of the conflict was beyond anything he could control. The display showed battlefield scenes that were more like mechanical slaughter than traditional combat. Soldiers fought and died in conditions that stripped away all concepts of honor or glory. In 4 years of fighting, over 15 million people died. Entire generations of young men were wiped out. The landscape of multiple continents was permanently scarred, and humans had only just begun to explore the possibilities of industrial warfare. Chen paused as disturbing images showed the aftermath of major battles. Fields covered with bodies, entire towns reduced to rubble, and survivors wandering through devastated landscapes. Ares Manas was horrified, but he told himself that this had been an aberration. Surely humans would learn from such terrible destruction. Surely they would never allow something like this to happen again. The ambassador's voice became darker as she continued. He was wrong. Just 20 years later, humans began an even more devastating conflict. The Second World War involved every major nation on our planet and introduced new concepts of warfare that violated every principle our war deity had ever taught. New images appeared showing the global scope of World War II. The maps revealed a conflict that truly spanned the entire planet, with battles fought on every continent and across all the oceans. This time, humans deliberately targeted civilian populations as a military strategy. We bombed cities specifically to kill non-combatants and break enemy morale. We created systematic programs to murder entire ethnic groups. We turned the mass killing of innocents into an organized industrial process. The hologram displayed scenes of destroyed cities and displaced populations. The scale of civilian suffering was beyond anything in human history. Ares Manas tried to intervene more directly than ever before. He manifested physically on battlefields across the planet, trying to protect innocents and stop the worst atrocities. But humans had become too numerous and too spread out. For every life he saved, thousands more were lost. Images showed a tall, glowing figure appearing in various locations, sometimes protecting groups of refugees, sometimes standing between opposing armies, always looking overwhelmed and desperate. Our war deity began to realize that humans were no longer just ignoring his teachings. We were actively working against them. Military leaders studied his previous interventions and planned their operations to avoid divine interference. They scheduled their worst actions for times when they knew he would be busy elsewhere. Chen's voice carried a note of profound sadness as she described these events. But the moment that truly broke Ares Manas came near the end of the Second World War. Humans had developed a new type of weapon, one that used the fundamental forces that held matter together. We created bombs that could destroy entire cities in seconds. The hologram showed a blinding flash of light, followed by images of complete devastation. Entire urban areas had been reduced to ash and rubble. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, humans used these nuclear weapons against civilian populations. In a matter of seconds, over 200,000 people were killed or fatally injured. Many more would die from radiation, poisoning in the following months and years. The images showed the aftermath of the nuclear bombings, the complete destruction of 2 major cities and the suffering of Survivors. Ares Manaz arrived at both target sites within minutes of the explosions. He found himself standing in the ruins of civilization itself, surrounded by destruction that exceeded anything in his divine imagination. For the first time in his existence, our war deity experienced something he had never felt before: fear. The hologram showed the divine figure standing amid nuclear devastation, his glowing form somehow diminished by the scope of human destruction. He was not afraid of death or defeat in battle. He was afraid of what humanity had become. We had created weapons that could destroy our entire world. We had developed the ability to commit genocide on a planetary scale. We had turned warfare into something that could end all life. Chen paused, letting the weight of these revelations settle over the alien assembly. Many delegates were showing visible distress at the concepts she was describing. For the next several decades, Ares Manaz watched as humans built more and more powerful nuclear weapons. We created bombs that were hundreds of times more destructive than the ones used in 1945. We built enough weapons to destroy our planet multiple times over. Images appeared showing massive missile systems and underground silos containing nuclear warheads. During what we call the Cold War, two human superpowers aimed thousands of nuclear weapons at each other. Our entire species lived under the constant threat of total annihilation. Any mistake or misunderstanding could have ended human civilization within hours. The hologram showed maps with trajectories, indicating how nuclear weapons could reach any point on the planet within minutes. In 1962, humans came closer to nuclear war than ever before. During what we call the Cuban Missile Crisis, military leaders on both sides prepared to launch their weapons. The fate of our entire species hung on the decisions of a few individuals. Chen's voice became very quiet as she reached the climax of this part of the story. Ares Manaz made a desperate decision. For the first time in thousands of years, he manifested physically in the human world and tried to intervene directly. He appeared to the leaders of both superpowers and begged them to step back from the brink of global destruction. The hologram showed a tall, armored figure appearing in government buildings and military command centers, his divine presence filling rooms with supernatural light. But humanity's response to divine intervention was not what our war deity expected. Instead of awe or reverence, human leaders reacted with scientific curiosity. They wanted to study his divine physiology. They asked if his powers could be weaponized. They treated him like a new type of technology rather than a god. Images showed humans in laboratory coats examining recordings of the divine manifestation, taking measurements and notes. Military scientists immediately began analyzing his appearance and abilities. They wanted to know if divine energy could be harnessed for weapons development. They discussed whether his intervention capabilities could be used to protect their own forces while attacking their enemies. Chen's expression showed a mixture of sadness and disgust as she described these events. Ares Manaz realized that humans no longer saw him as a guide or teacher. We saw him as a resource to be exploited. We had become so focused on advancing our military capabilities that even the appearance of our own war deity was viewed primarily as an opportunity for weapons research. The final images in this section showed the divine figure retreating from human contact, his form becoming fainter and more distant. Our war deity understood that something fundamental had changed in the relationship between humans and divinity. We had not just outgrown his guidance, we had evolved beyond the need for any guidance at all. We had become beings that could threaten even gods. Chen looked around the assembly, noting the shocked expressions on many alien faces. But Ares Manaz still believed that he could find a way to restore his relationship with humanity. He thought that if he could just make us understand the dangers we faced, we would return to following his ancient teachings. He was about to discover that humans had already made a very different decision about our future. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Ambassador Chen stood at the speaking platform, preparing to reveal the most shocking part of her species' history. The holographic display showed images of Earth in the late 1960s, a world still divided by the Cold War, but beginning to explore space. In 1969, Chen began, while humans were taking their first steps on our moon, something unprecedented was happening in secret locations around our world. The leaders of both major superpowers were holding discussions that no other species in galactic history had ever attempted. The hologram showed meeting rooms in undisclosed locations, with representatives from different human nations sitting around tables. The meetings looked formal and serious, but their true purpose was not immediately clear. These leaders had spent years studying the interventions of Ares Manaz during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They had analyzed every aspect of his manifestation, from his energy signatures to his behavioral patterns. They had reached a conclusion that shocked even themselves. Chen's voice became very steady and matter-of-fact, as if she were describing a routine military operation, rather than something that would horrify most civilized species. The conclusion was simple. Ares Manaz had become a strategic liability. Our war deity was no longer guiding human warfare. He was limiting it. His concepts of honor and restraint were preventing humanity from reaching our full potential as a military species. Images appeared showing military analyses and scientific reports. The documents were covered with charts and graphs measuring divine intervention patterns and their effects on military effectiveness. Human military leaders had discovered that our war deity was predictable. His moral constraints meant that he would always try to protect non-combatants and limit destruction. Enemy forces could exploit this predictability by positioning themselves near innocent populations or staging conflicts in ways that would force divine intervention. The hologram displayed strategic diagrams showing how Ares Manaz's protective instincts could be used against him. The analysis was coldly logical and completely amoral, but the real problem was not tactical, it was philosophical. Humans had evolved beyond the need for divine oversight of our conflicts. We had developed military sciences and strategic thinking that surpassed anything our war deity could understand. His ancient wisdom had become primitive by our standards. Chen paused and looked around the assembly. Many delegates were leaning forward, unable to believe what they were hearing. The human leaders reached a unanimous decision across all political boundaries. The Cold War rivals agreed on this single point. Ares Manaz needed to be removed from the equation. But gods cannot be simply dismissed or ignored. Divine beings exist beyond normal physical laws. They cannot be bargained with or reasoned away. The ambassador's next words sent a wave of shock through the entire assembly. So humanity decided to kill our own war deity. The silence that followed was absolute. Several delegates made choking sounds. Others sat back in their chairs as if physically struck. The concept of deicide, the murder of a god, was so far beyond normal experience that most species had no words for it. The planning took several years. Chen continued calmly. Human scientists and military strategists worked together to develop methods that could affect a divine being. We studied ancient texts from multiple cultures to understand the nature of godhood. We analyzed energy patterns from previous divine manifestations. The hologram showed laboratories where humans in protective suits worked with strange equipment. The images suggested a combination of advanced technology and ancient ritual knowledge. We discovered that gods, while powerful, are not invulnerable. They exist in a state of quantum uncertainty that can be collapsed under specific conditions. Divine beings derive their power from belief and worship, but they also depend on consistent physical laws to manifest in reality. Scientific diagrams appeared, showing complex mathematical formulas and energy readings. The research looked like a combination of theoretical, physics, and applied theology. The key breakthrough came when human physicists realized that divine manifestation creates measurable distortions in spacetime. These distortions follow predictable patterns and can be manipulated using high-energy particle bombardment combined with precisely tuned electromagnetic fields. Chen's clinical description made the process sound like a routine scientific procedure rather than the murder of a deity. On December 15, 1969, human forces lured Ares Manaz into a trap. We staged a fake nuclear crisis that required his immediate intervention. When he manifested physically to prevent global destruction, we activated our prepared weapon systems. The hologram showed a blinding explosion of light, unlike anything seen in previous images. The detonation seemed to tear reality itself apart, creating visual distortions that hurt to look at directly. The process took 17 minutes. Our war deity fought back, of course, but he was constrained by his own moral code. He could not bring himself to seriously harm the humans he had spent millennia trying to protect. His mercy became his weakness. Images showed the final moments of the divine being, a figure of light growing dimmer and more fragmented, as human weapon systems focused their energy on his physical form. When it was over, Ares Manas was dead. The first god in galactic history had been deliberately killed by his own worshippers. Human military commanders confirmed the elimination of divine interference in terrestrial warfare. The ancient compact was officially terminated. Chen looked around the hall at the horrified faces staring back at her. She could see that many delegates were struggling to process what they had heard. The immediate practical effects were significant. Human military capabilities increased dramatically without divine restrictions. We could now plan and execute operations based purely on effectiveness rather than moral considerations. Our strategic thinking became more flexible and creative. The hologram showed images of human military forces in the decades following 1969. The operations looked more efficient and coordinated, but also somehow more threatening than previous conflicts. But the psychological effects were even more important. Killing our own war deity proved to humanity that we had evolved beyond the need for divine guidance in any area of our existence. We had become our own gods of war, answerable only to ourselves. Chen's final words carried a weight that seemed to press down on every being in the assembly. We did not retire our war deity, honored delegates. We executed him for being inadequate. Ares Manas was bound by concepts like mercy, honor, and restraint. These limitations made him unsuitable for guiding a species that had learned to wage war with scientific precision and unlimited creativity. The ambassador stepped closer to the microphone, her voice becoming harder and more direct. When your gods of war are still constrained by primitive concepts like protecting innocence and showing mercy to defeated enemies, perhaps you should ask yourselves a crucial question. In the relationship between your species and your deities, who truly rules whom? The final holographic image showed human space fleets moving between star systems, carrying weapons and technologies that the galaxy had never seen before. Humanity has been a member of this galactic council for 30 years. In that time, we have never needed to invoke divine protection or guidance in any conflict. We conduct our own wars according to our own rules. We answer to no higher authority than human reason and human will. Chen's concluding words left the assembly in stunned silence. So when you ask why humans do not have a war deity, understand that the answer reveals something fundamental about our species. We do not have gods of war because we have become something that our gods could not control, could not guide, and ultimately could not survive. The ambassador returned to her seat, leaving thousands of alien beings to contemplate a truth that challenged everything they thought they knew about the relationship between civilized species and divine authority. For the first time in galactic history, they were faced with a species that had not only rejected divine guidance, but had actively eliminated it. In the silence that followed, every delegate understood that humanity represented something entirely new in the galaxy, a species that had chosen to become their own gods, with all the terrifying implications that choice carried.